Welcome to the Leadership Bootcamp Podcast. This is Jeff Strauss. You'll have to forgive certain aspects of the podcast of late. If you've seen any of the video episodes from months ago and then more recently, you'll have noticed my background change and the audio quality may have gotten slightly worse over time. For the past several weeks, I've been preparing for a cross-country move from Los Angeles to Charlotte, North Carolina, and things were gradually being packed away. And that's why you see this generic hotel background behind me as I'm coming to you today on day 3 of my cross-country drive, where I present to you from Duncanville, Texas. And this is also why this episode's release was delayed from my planned release date of the second week of January. You'll see the background of my videos change again over the next several months as my home life begins to stabilize in Charlotte and I build out my office come podcast studio. But for this intro, I bring you today's office. And now that the housekeeping is complete, I am very pleased to bring to you my guest on today's episode, Todd Smith. Todd and I go back some years. We'd met initially when he interviewed me for a job at Snapchat around about 2017. I got the offer, but the timing wasn't quite right, and I declined due to no fault of Todd's. Over the years, we'd run into each other at events where we were both invited to speak, and in 2021, I got the opportunity to work together again with Todd when I received another offer from Snapchat, and this time I actually accepted. Todd left Snap, and we found ourselves, through a series of fortunate events, working together yet again at both of our subsequent jobs. Today, Todd is the CEO and co-founder of TAHO, a company that has developed a novel approach to running resource and cost-heavy AI orders of magnitude more cost-effective and efficiently, which you can learn about more at taho.is. A link is also in the show notes. He's a former executive at the world's #1 developer productivity tool, Docker, which is not to be confused with the pants, which are Dockers, and a former leader at both Snapchat and Meta. We talk about the importance of professional networking, authentic leadership, the desired capabilities of a leader, what leaders should and shouldn't do, leadership challenges at different levels of an organization, and how to pivot and capitalize on new ideas and turbulent times, among other topics. And now, without further delay, I bring to you my friend, Todd Smith.
Todd, thank you so much for joining me on the Leadership Bootcamp Podcast. It's been a long time, and I'm really excited to have you on with me. We go way back, and this interview has been a long time coming, but I'm really excited to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here, and you've been doing a great job with the podcast, by the way, and I've had a lot of fun watching it, and now I get to be a part of a very esteemed group on the Leadership Bootcamp Podcast, so I'm pretty excited here.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say, and I'll jump right in. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, about TAHO, and your journey to where you are today?
Sure. So TAHO is a software company. We started it back in May of last year, May of 2024. And we aim to solve the biggest challenge in the tech industry today, which is since the advent of AI, workloads in computing are 100 times the size of what they once were in a SaaS world. And what we're doing is we're helping everyone to get far more computing capability out of their existing hardware. In a day like today, where everybody's trying to get more hardware, faster hardware, more data centers, creating a problem of even trying to provide energy for the forecasted data centers, we're aiming to solve all of that just with simple software. That's what we do.
And, the story of how you landed on TAHO is actually a really interesting one. And I want to approach it from a leadership perspective and talk about pivoting, talking about, recognizing opportunities, attacking those opportunities in markets of turbulence. Can you talk a little bit about how TAHO came to be, particularly in the framing of recognizing an opportunity and pivoting the business, and what that meant for you as a leader to pivot the business to exploit that opportunity that you saw?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So The story of TAHO is, like you said, we pivoted into this tech. The reality was that we originally formed a company last year which was aimed at optimizing AI for businesses. We wanted to build a BI tool that helped businesses understand what type of returns they're getting on their AI investments. We built it. We put a lot of time into it. We built it, and it worked quite well. However, it was definitely a compute hog, and it made it even more complicated for us when we took it to market, because as a compute hog, basically it's a BI tool, just like all other BI tools. It's slurping up all the activities going on in the environment and providing dashboarding and analytics metrics on the performance of all of those systems. It's a very, very normal dashboarding BI tool. However, in order to execute that, we needed to slurp up and understand all of the AI transactions that were going on in the environment. Well, slurping up that data just sounds terrible to just about any business. And, in a SaaS world, in a world where everybody's tired of giving way too much data away to all the companies that already provide SaaS services, we decided to just go old school with it and land our product in our customer's environment. Well, landing the product in the customer's environment and then blowing the doors off of their those computing budgets that they have, their cloud computing budgets that they have, ain't going to work. So we said, okay, back to the drawing board. Even though this works, and even though this BI tool works, it's too expensive to run in a customer's environment as we intend. So let's make it more lightweight. And we did. But then when we did that, we realized, holy smokes, we have something that's the foundational platform that we've built to run the BI tool is far, far more valuable than the BI tool itself, because it has the potential to completely change the unit cost economics for everyone's compute. And when you look at that, you read the market, and we're reading the market, seeing the number 1, 2, and 3 articles every day in all of tech. If you're listening to the All In podcast, the number one thing that they're all talking about is energy and AI's endless hunger for energy today. And that's derivative of AI just costing a lot to compute. It's way too heavyweight to compute. So we just said, hey, let's pivot. Let's take this awesome BI tool that we just spent 5 months building. Let's put that on the shelf for maybe a rainy day, and let's lean 100% into this new platform that we have. So that's how we came to. That's the rationale for pivoting. If you in nature, you have a leadership question here, and I'll tell you I screwed it up. In hindsight, I'm going to tell you I screwed it up because, from a leadership perspective, I completely regret not pivoting earlier. Right? This isn't an aha moment that we had. That was a single point in time where we go, oh, today is October 14th. We're a BI tool company. The evening of the 14th, we decided, oh, wow, this is a better thing. And then the 15th, we switched over. That's not how it goes. There's lots of market research involved. There's disbelief involved. There's hanging on to something for too long because you just spent all of this time and money. There's tons of investment behind it, and you're reluctant to let it go or to decide too fast. And that's certainly true for us. We were probably in that limbo of trying to decide what to do for the better part of like 2.5, 3 months. Right. And that's a lot of burn. That's a lot of burn when you're a zero revenue company. That's a lot of burn. But, once we finally came to that conclusion, we just felt, we've got to move. We've got to shift over. We did it. I regret not doing it sooner. But I'll honestly say just even it's an overarching theme on this company on the whole. I'll tell you right now, there isn't anything that we've done that I don't wish we did sooner, even the mistakes, right? Hindsight being 2020, but there is not a single thing that we do or that we've decided to do that I haven't wished I led the company to do far sooner.
Yeah, it's a struggle for, I think, entrepreneurs is making those types of missteps or any types of error and then not wishing to have done something sooner. Hindsight it's always 2020, but it's also such an emotional roller coaster in that way, right? Because it leaves you with so much regret. You mentioned two things which are really interesting. One is the sunk cost aspect, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times companies or individuals will run themselves into the ground because of that sunk cost. They've invested so much and they refuse to pivot. So I want to tie that into another interesting word that you used, which was disbelief. You said there was so much disbelief. How did you, as the leader of the company, overcome that disbelief and lead your team through that disbelief while people are seeing the sunk cost already, right? And then they're looking at the sunk cost in the past. Mm-hmm. Here you are in the present. There's disbelief about the future. How do you as a leader navigate through that and lead your team to that, to use a biblical reference, like how do you lead them to the promised land through all of that disbelief while there's all that emotional turmoil? Because at the end of the day, yes, it's on the balance sheet. You could see the effects on the balance sheet, but there's a big emotional aspect to it as well. What did you have a particular strategy, or was it like every day you wake up and you're like, here's what we need to do today, and it's just execution? How did you navigate through that?
So it is all about execution, but I think it's multi-tiered, right? And it wasn't a single thing that I had done, but there's a few things involved here. It's a dynamic environment. We basically let the market help to tell us what the right thing to do was, not only in the research that we were able to do and what we all know to be true. We've got a really talented team with people who have very deep experience in infrastructure. And number one, being inclusive in these discussions, making certain that everybody's concerns were heard, right? Making certain that I'm not bump steering everybody in those conversations. There's times to bump steer, right? But not in this scenario. And when we lay it all out on the line, and then we also, indexing to the market piece, it's not just the market research. And it's not just the inclusive feelings and thoughts of all the experts that we employ. We went and raised against this, right? We raised against the thesis, the research thesis, and built out some demos of what it is that we can do in small ways to showcase prototyping of what the product will be able to do in the future if we go down this path. And we were able to raise good money on it to get us roadmap or to get us a runway of, roughly, about 18 months, then it's proof positive to everybody that, okay, we have the belief of strong, trusted investors. We have the good business rationale. We have our own gumption, right? Mm-hmm. We've had our own vision. All right, let's all move forward here. And that's where everybody, I think everybody's able to attach to those different indices of proof that that's the right direction for us to go. So if I were to assemble it that way, that's the way I would assemble it, because there's historical pieces here that are all not indexed to me in the direction that I provided or led with the team. But, if I was leading them on the journey of discovery through those different pieces, whether it's inclusive conversations, whether it's market research, or whether it's even, hey, can we raise money on the idea? right?
Yeah.
Can we sell it to them, right? And if that's the case, then that's really good signal that we'll be able to sell it in market, right? And we were not in a scenario where we were raising against a product we were already selling. We're in a scenario where we were raising against an idea, right? And we were raising against basically proofed out prototyping of the idea so that we could get the money we need in order to build it and take it to market, right? We do talk to other, potential customers as well for that market research and things, but yeah, it's the assembly of those things and leading the team through that exercise of all those indices.
Yeah. It's an interesting, when I distill it down, it's like I imagine all these things as ingredients going into this gumbo, and it's like this big stew of data, and there's instinct, and there is skill, and then there's hope, and it's just this big gumbo of different things. And it makes me think, as much as somebody tries to create a blueprint or a roadmap for successful leadership, there are skills that are involved, there are talents that are involved, there's data that's involved, and those can all be sort of learned or assessed. Those are the hard and the soft sciences. But then there are other things that are, it's sometimes it's the luck of the draw. Sometimes it's, you always hear hope is not a strategy, but there is an aspect of the uncontrollable when it comes to any sort of broad leadership change, or rather broad change that somebody has to lead somebody through or lead a team through. And so I find it interesting to hear all of those different things sort of amalgamate into this successful pivot for the company. And it stems with those, the inclusive leadership, the inclusive conversations, having the talks, getting the expertise from people. And I want to use that key to pivot into my next question, which is, I myself have benefited from your leadership. You have been my boss in previous jobs. And I wonder, and as have many other people have benefited from your leadership as well, not just me, but I wonder what forms your leadership philosophy, how you lead people, and what excites you about the challenge of leadership, and what challenges you about leading people.
Yeah. So, thanks for the kind words. I would challenge the credit that you gave me, but I'll take it now for now. But it's appreciated. When it comes to leadership, so I think that in much the way that people are just geared or cut out for different things in life, and they feel compelled to execute in or lean into certain areas of life. I've always had a gravity to leadership. I've always had a gravity to, I've always had this gravity to leading teams, or even helping to inspire people towards a common goal, right? And whether I'm inspiring an individual on their own career path, or inspiring a team of people towards those common goals, it's something that I really enjoy doing. But to me, the core value or the core talent that you're flexing in leadership is inspiration, right? It's inspiring people to do a thing, right? And it's something that I've always enjoyed. From a challenge perspective, people are different. Everybody's an individual, and everybody bring their own talents. They bring their own motivators. They bring their own skill sets. They bring their own interests. They bring their own dimensions of understanding. They bring, I've been through different courses, study exercises, through a lot of the different personality or behavioral traits on inspiring people, whether it's like the 6 types of working genius, or if it's the DISC assessment, or if it's Enneagram, or and some of the others, and leveraging those, right? But there's still some unknowns out there that even when you're employing all of those different, individually or all those different methodologies, there's still things that are still a bit of a mystery. I think that cognitively, how people understand or process information, right? I think that some of those mechanisms don't really, they dance around it, but they don't fully understand it. I think that's something I'm still trying to understand. I think gaps generationally, right, are they've become more and more relevant as I get older, right? Because I know how the generation that came before me thought, because I studied them. The two generations that came before me thought, because I've worked with them and studied under them. I know my generation quite well. The generation just below me, so I'm a Gen X. The generation just below, the millennial, I get it took a lot of mistakes, but I think that I feel pretty well adjusted to leading today. The Gen Z, just beyond them, I'm still figuring it out. I'm still figuring it out quite a bit, and the ones coming behind them, I'm raising that generation, right? And figuring that one out's a pretty tricky one as well. So, you asked about leadership challenges. I'd say the challenge is really understanding people from a cognitive and generational culture, right? Generational values. I think that's a pretty tricky thing to nail. And what do I like about it? I like the mystery of it all. I like the fact that I don't get it, and then I'm constantly trying to figure it out. There's tons of great methodologies out there. I've learned that some of them don't map from one environment to another. I've worked big tech, middle tech, rapid growth tech, right? I've worked hospitality industry, right? And I've had leadership roles across all of them. I've worked on job sites, in construction, and have led people in that realm. And then in the, media production environment, I've led people in those realms. I've led people in all these realms, but not all leadership principles are fungible from one to the next. And, I think that's something that I've had to really come to terms with running a startup, because there were a couple of things that I saw really quick that just wouldn't work in this environment. Like some things that I had leaned on, some practices that I had leaned on a lot, like in my earlier days in big tech, like when I was over at, rapid growth Facebook during that time through IPO and all that. And, there were some things that I would have thought as, these are the best leadership principles. This is the way you do it. And then I get to this very small startup environment, and some of it ports over really well. Some of it, no. And it's in this small environment, no, not at all. And, there are big business leadership practices that work really well in an environment that has, a lot of funds to deal with, an environment that doesn't have, the pressures of market fit, or an environment where you are the dominant player, where you are the dominant force. If your company is the dominant force in a market environment, it affords you the luxury of being able to exercise some really cool leadership practices that would kill a small company, so.
I do know, you mentioned something pretty interesting that I never really thought about, which was I've also worked at large tech, and coming back to a smaller company, which I've done at my current job from my last job, and even the job before that was even bigger. What I have noticed is, you're right, not all leadership principles apply. What I think applies best, from the larger companies that have gone through the scale down to the smaller companies, are like systems and processes tend to apply very well, because you can scale those down and you can almost anticipate what it looks like to scale up, right? Like something that I've encountered in my technical role, moving from large companies down to smaller companies, are like, oh, we shouldn't do things this way, because at scale, this is how it ends up, right? It's very easy to apply those things. It's a little harder to apply the management principles when you go from managing a multinational team of potentially, if you're a manager of managers and you're managing, like, let's say 6 managers, and each of those people are managing 10 people. So, your organization is more, almost 70 people large. The management principles, the leadership principles are very different when you go to being directly a manager of 7 people, right? So there are pros and cons to that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, some leadership principles, like motivation, apply across the board. Others, the particularities, implementation details, things like that, tend maybe not to apply so easily. You have, on your journey to founding TAHO, which you founded with a former colleague of yours who is now your co-founder.
2 colleagues, FYI.
2 colleagues.
Yep.
Two colleagues of yours.
Yep.
My mistake. Michael also?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
nice.
So
Okay.
Justin Linus and Michael Ashby. Yep.
Okay, nice. I did not realize that. My apologies, Michael, if you're watching this. Michael, who doesn't smile in photos and who will not smile when I slighted him just now. So my apologies, Michael.
He will smile. He does have a good sense of humor. So
Okay, good.
may not come through with photos, but he smiles many times throughout the day. So,
Nice. Well, with 2 of your colleagues, so my question here is, one of the things, especially as people are coming up in leadership, maybe they're moving from an IC to a first-time manager, or maybe even just as an IC, they tend to look down upon the concept of professional networking and relationship development. And they a lot of times, this is a generality, of course, but especially people who are earlier in their careers tend to think that networking is disingenuous, it's politicking, they don't want to do it. A relationship is very transactional, and they don't like the feel of that, and they feel sort of icky, developing professional relationships with people, because it seems like it's an inauthentic form of a relationship. It's this transactional business relationship, until later in their careers when they realize the importance of professional networking. So you founded TAHO with 2 of your former colleagues. Can you talk to me about what professional networking and a developmental network like that means to you, and why it's important?
Yeah. So I think the realization as you get farther in your career that your network is your path to future opportunities, right? So whether it feels genuine or not, it genuinely is your path to other opportunities. You put all things being equal, you take 2 resources, 2 individuals who have the exact same background and experience. The one that is a known entity by somebody within that target business is going to get the job. They're going to get the sale. They're going to have the opportunity to flourish in that environment. So there isn't a path to if you want to take the path to negate community and fostering community, if you want to take the path to negating that, you must bring something that makes you shine in another light. So if your skill set, if you have proven skill set or proven talents that a company needs or the industry needs, then, and you want to completely ignore the fostering of community, you can do it. You better be really, really good, but you can do it, right? Now, there's also no guarantees, even though you're really good, that somebody younger, slightly more driven, in some ways more capable, is going to eclipse your own talents, and they come in and undercut your price, meaning your own market cap, your own revenue earnings potential. They undercut that. They're going to get the job. So it requires knowing you more than that. A perfect example is go try to get a job, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to interview with people. What are you doing in the interview? Well, you're trying to help people get to know you really well, and you're trying to get to know them really well to see if, one, they feel you'd be a good fit. Number two, if you're not just can you do the job, but are you a fit? Do you line up culturally with what it is that's going to help make them more successful? Are you adding to the culture within that organization? When we look at, so you're being assessed to that degree in an interview anyways. So, you can avoid it to a degree, right? You can avoid that community forming, but the interview is a piece of community forming anyways. So look, and I'm also not saying that anybody that's in a work environment or a job environment must, play some political game, right? They're going to exist, but they don't have to, play it. But to some degree, you have to foster interactions with people. You have to, or you got to be really darn good at what it is that you do that outshines and makes you that much more valuable in the marketplace.
Yeah, I agree to a large extent. I might even argue that it doesn't even matter how good you are in the emerging marketplace today. I mean, there's so much competition. And with the advent of AI, when it comes to certain skill sets, you're going to be outshined no matter what anyway. And I like to I'll tell a couple anecdotes, if I may, on the importance of networking, because I agree with you. It took me a long time in my career to get on over the hump of thinking that networking was something that should not be I shouldn't be afraid of, or I shouldn't be disgusted by. It took me quite a long time. And I felt like it was almost a moral positioning, right? Before I realized that that was the wrong position to take. And here are a couple of examples. So first of all, you and I are the perfect example, right? I worked with you at Snapchat. You moved over to where I am now, which is Docker. And you were a tech exec. You were an executive at Docker, and you said, "Hey, I've got this position opening up. Are you interested?" And that was the door into my interviewing. At Snapchat, funny enough, even at the job right before that, our mutual friend JR, who I had worked with years and years prior, nearly, I would say, something like the better part of a decade prior at Twitter, the company formerly known as Twitter. JR and I worked together, and he and I connected about the job at Snapchat, and that's how I got at Snap. And, I have multiple examples of that throughout my career of knowing somebody, and it wasn't a sure thing, but it was a foot in the door. And then it was me that had to I always say I can open the door for, you can open the door for someone, but you have to walk through it. But that was the door opening for me. And I always tell the example of a former colleague and a friend of mine. His name is Randy. And when I had this 10-month job at this company that ended up getting sold to AT&T. And when I was there, I was leading I was supposed to be leading a couple of departments. It's a crazy story what ended up happening. I actually left Twitter for this job. Not a lot of people know this story, but I left Twitter for this job. I got this job. They flew me down to LA for a couple of rounds of interviews. I got the job. I was supposed to be managing a couple of teams of over a dozen people total. I gave a month's notice, which is my standard notice that I give companies. And in the month that I gave my notice at Twitter, and I moved down to LA, and I was the type of person that left a job on a Friday and started a new job on a Monday. I've never been the type of person to take a couple weeks of vacation. It's not built into me. So it was a 4th of July weekend. I packed up a U-Haul in San Francisco. It was a Thursday. Drove down to LA on a Friday. My brother met me at my new apartment in Culver City, helped me unload everything on a Friday night, and Monday I started my new job. Well, what they didn't tell me was in between the time that I accepted the offer and I started the job on Monday, every single person except one had quit. So I was there to manage one person from a whole team of people, many of whom I had interviewed with. And the last remaining individual, his last day was Wednesday. So everybody quit And
Jiminy crickets.
it
That's
was,
terrible.
I've never experienced anything like it. So it was, and it sounds like fiction, but
Oh yeah. Oh no. It's a story. This
yeah,
is juicy. Actually, I feel like we've just reversed roles. I feel like I'm interviewing you because this is very interesting. So
well,
so you landed? You have obviously all the job responsibilities.
yep.
That also all of the work people were doing that roll up
Yep.
into your position was you're still
Yep.
accountable for all of that. How did you navigate that?
Okay, so that's a good question. So this all goes to this all goes to the network, right? Creating a network. So that's the climax of the story. So I'll get to that point. So I'm working 12, 15-hour days, obviously, right? Like, I mean, everything had to be done from not only managing the department and getting all the work done, but like the place was in shambles. Like the network closet was in complete disarray. So I'm cable managing. There were, hundreds of empty boxes in storage cabinets as I'm trying to find equipment. I'm breaking down boxes and taking them out it's literally it was like 15 hours of manual labor combined with the cognitive labor of the job and getting things set up and processing it, whatever. So at the time I had moved down to LA with my ex-girlfriend, and she actually helped me at the job for several hours a day. So much so that when the HR department invited me, because I was a department of one, out to the company dinner or whatever, they invited her as well as an honorary person. So she was there to help out. That didn't last very long, neither the relationship nor the job. But anyway, that's a separate story. There was a guy there named Randy, and Randy worked for the workplace operations department, and he was a temp. And he was restocking the refrigerators. He was restocking the paper, doing a couple hours a day, just doing temp stuff. So one day I was grabbing a drink from the fridge, and he and I struck up a conversation, and I really liked him. And he was like, hey, I'm just doing this job. I'm trying to find a thing, blah, blah, blah. I was like, are you technical at all? He's like, I mean, I could click my way around a computer. I was like, you know what? I like you. And you already, you, Todd, already know my philosophy of hiring. I hire for attitude and aptitude. Those are the two things I look for when I hire a candidate. So I really liked his attitude. And I was like, you know what? He doesn't have to do anything super technical. I'm going to print out a couple of just procedures, and he just has to follow the procedures. And that would help take a huge workload off of me. So I talked to the workplace operations team and I said, look, I know this guy's a temp. I want to hire him full-time onto my team. I have the work to be done. He just needs to follow a procedure. I don't want to go through the whole rigmarole of an interview. He just needs to follow step by step, like a couple of sheets of paper. And they said, okay, fine. So I hired him onto my team full time. Fast forward, right? I leave the company after 10 months. This story, by the way, is how I developed my idea about attitude and aptitude. He had such a strong aptitude. By the time I left, I had hired a team of 7. He was the most technical person on the team. I left that company to go to Tinder, where I was there at Tinder for almost 4 years. Randy was my second hire at Tinder. I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, are you looking to come over? Can I interest you in coming over?" He said, "Sure." Hired him. He worked with me for 3 years at Tinder. After Tinder, I left to Netflix. Randy was my first call to hire somebody. Hey, I got this job over at Netflix. Do you want to come interview? I can't guarantee a hire, but I can open the door for you. Comes over to interview at Netflix, kills the interview. Super technical guy. He's still at Netflix leading one of their departments now.
Oh, that's amazing. I love this story.
My point being is it's the professional networking is so important that somebody like Randy, who was a temp stocking a fridge, now he's leading a team at Netflix. I mean, it's like the pinnacle of a career. And he loved music and AV, audio engineering, and that's what he's doing now. And, it just goes to the importance of professional networking. And it's a story I always think about and I always share because it's so poignant of a story.
Well, it's poignant, and especially in the fact that it's the exact example of where big value comes in in networking, in community development, right? And that's the thing too, is that, it's okay to not like doing that stuff, right? It's okay. And, to whatever degree that you're going to do it, or engage in it, I think that the one thing that's really important, and I think this was a through line between both yourself and myself, is that we didn't like doing it, and we had this idealistic view that it shouldn't be needed, right? And politics shouldn't be there. And, I know that people assign those terms to it. And one of my favorite definitions of politics, this is not according to Hoyle, okay? This is not a Webster's dictionary definition of politicking, but it was one that I heard before, and it's one that I like. And the workplace politics really exist when two people talk about another person, right? And it's when person A goes to person B to talk about person C, right? And that's the negative side, I think, of politics, right? And it can happen, and it fluctuates in group sizes and factions and teams and all that stuff. But at its core concept, that's what it is. Over at TAHO, we're very purposeful in creating an environment that doesn't allow that to happen, that a culture that doesn't accept that culture, that's culturally wrong here. And it's a culture of value, a principle that we have, a guiding principle that we have, and it's called go direct, right? And if you have something that you want to speak about, it aligns with our value of being bold. It aligns with our value of being transparent, and we say go direct. We have rules for escalate when. If you go direct, you have a discussion about a thing, and you're at an impasse that, just the two people involved rationally can't get beyond, then those two escalate to the next person within the accountability chain, right? And then we have a smart conversation then. But the first thing, and if anybody ever comes to me about a challenge they're having in the environment, or about, especially if it's about another person, hey, so-and-so did such and such. Great. Did you talk to him about it? It's my very first question, right? And if the answer is no, and it's not an HR related issue, if it's not a, HIPAA violation, if it's not a discrimination issue, if it's not any of those, that list of things, right? I ask for them to go direct and, go talk to them about it first and see what you can figure out. And I'll also even provide some coaching on how to navigate the situation, or maybe we can do some role playing or something of that nature to help them out, right? In some cases, if the person is really, really mentally blocked on it, and I'm coaching them to get there, I will end route them, go to the other person involved and say, hey, how are you doing? This thing's going on. This person's going to come talk to you about it. And I want you, I try to prep them to be open-minded and ready them to receive information, right? To set the entire conversation, the two people involved up for success, because I want for them to have that healthy interaction, right? And I know that we're stemming from politics. I know that we're stemming from networking and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like it's a salient point because there's a lot of people out there that have experienced a really unhealthy politically driven environment where people have to play a Game of Thrones style work environment, or navigate a Game of Thrones style work environment. And I know, and I feel as though a lot of them, I feel that navigating that Game of Thrones style work environment, that political work environment, is their root cause for not liking networking, right? And I think there's healthy practices I think that leaders can inject, but I also want to state to people that are out there that say, I really hate networking. If your root cause is because of these unhealthy practices of interaction, find another place to work, right? Because there are good environments out there, and you're going to know a healthy environment when you start learning about them and their culture. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but
No, not at all.
Culture is such a big cornerstone for how we lead Tahoe. It is the singular most important thing, and being purposeful about building a healthy culture that's going to set the company up for success is goal and priority number one for us. It also stems back to earlier in our conversation where I had shared that some leadership principles just are not fungible from big business to smaller business, or big tech to startup tech. It's because there's cultural norms, there's leadership activities that just don't net a successful environment in those two completely different business scenarios, business environments, right? And in crafting the culture with intent as a leader is the single most important thing I've learned to do at the different places I've worked. And it's certainly the cornerstone to what we've founded Tahoe upon. We built a culture with purpose. Jeff, you were, you came on as an advisor to help us found that culture and help us figure out from a mission and vision formulation and values formulation, like how are we going to do that? And we did that with intent at the very beginning of the company. Before we even hired the very first person, right? We had that established. It has evolved. It has grown. People can actually go and check out our culture deck to see what that's like. If you go into taho.is, which is our website, if you go into taho.is/culture, our culture deck is always there for someone to go and thumb through. It's a PDF and everybody has access to it. It's navigatable through our website and all that kind of stuff. But even after I interview, when we enter our interview process, the very first thing I ask people is, have you looked at our culture deck yet? And a lot of times they say, no, haven't seen it yet. Or they're like, yeah, I saw the link to it on the job description. I went and checked it out. I'll ask them what they think of it. Or if they haven't seen it yet, we finished the first conversation. Go check out the culture deck, read through it, see if this is the right thing for you, and then let's have another conversation afterwards, right? And it's so foundational to purposefully building a strong environment, and like I said, it's a cornerstone of leadership for us.
If there is ever an advertisement for the kind of company that people should go work for, like a recruiting call, it's this. Because first of all, so much respect for you and your co-founders to intentionally build the company from a foundation of culture. Some companies never start that way. And companies can be successful with poor cultures, yes, but people are unhappy, and those companies could do better with better culture, both from an employee retention perspective, an engagement perspective, a bottom line revenue perspective. The list goes on. Culture is so closely tied to performance in so many different areas that people just don't realize and don't recognize it. And I will say, so kudos to you and your co-founders and everybody who works at Tahoe for actually living that culture, because it is a challenge to do so, but it is the right challenge. And so I do have to say that. I will also say, you make a really interesting point. I think the more developed you become in your career, and the more in tune you are to the machinations of the company, the less you think about politicking as person A talking to person B about person C. And I think you're absolutely right about that. I think people who don't have a robust or nuanced view of how beneficial politicking can be, I'm not saying that it's like a good thing, because many times it's not a good thing. It's a necessary thing, and it does. And what I mean by that is that it does happen. And so being able to navigate that is a very important skill to have. But you're right. When people think about the negative side of politicking, it's because they think about person A talking to person B about person C. That's what that's one of the things they have in their minds. And I totally agree. I never really thought about it from that point of view. And I think you're right about that, because when I think about politicking at work, I politic at work, but I politic for example, for the benefit of my team, right?
Yeah.
So I try to engage in that beneficial politicking.
Sure.
So it does happen. And then there is that flip side to it. So yeah, that's really important. And I love the fact that you have a culture deck on the website. A lot of companies, yeah, go ahead.
I want to state that, it's really fun because your pedigree includes Netflix.
Yeah.
One of the first companies to do this really well. One of the first few to ever even build a culture deck.
Yep.
Netflix, right?
Yep.
And what's really funny, I have to share this anecdote, is we had built our doc, we called it our pillars doc, and it had the mission, the values, and then just a bunch of guiding principles, mission, vision, values, guiding principles, on how we do things. And it was a Google Doc. Mm-hmm. And we had built that, and that's what I had been indexing to, and the team had been indexing to. And when you're a fully remote environment like the one we're in, docs like that become extremely important. Repositories of information like that we can reference become extremely important. Well, I had never come across the culture deck. I had never come across that philosophy. I'm based in Florida, and I was up in Sarasota, and there's a hot company based out of Sarasota right now called 10x AI, TENEX.ai. And I went to a CEO meeting, in a club meeting up in Tampa, as a matter of fact. And when I was there, the CEO of 10x AI was there, and he was presenting, and he had shared the importance of building a culture deck and hiring for culture and being hyper focused and extremely vigilant on culture. And it was like music to my ears because it was consistent with where my head was at, but I had never seen the culture deck before. And he said, "Hey, you can check it out on 10x.ai/culture." And sure enough, if you go do that right now, you'll pull up our culture deck. And he said on stage there, "Look, we didn't invent this. This isn't our thing. We stand on the shoulders of giants here. We stole this from Netflix." Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, wow, there's a Netflix does that. And then I go and look up Netflix's culture deck. And then I start looking at culture decks on the whole. And then and then immediately after that, I thought, oh, we need to turn our pillars doc into a culture deck. And it doesn't need to be an internal doc. It needs to be something that's accessible by everybody so that they can all understand us, right? And it was like one of those aha moments, right? And it's an anecdote I had to share with you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because you're right. Having worked at Netflix, one of the things that interested me in the job when I was applying for the job at Netflix, and funny enough, Netflix was one of the first jobs in a very long time I had to apply to, because back to the professional networking conversation, most of the other jobs in my career were situations like you and I or JR, where there was a door that was open for me that I had to step through with my own capabilities. But the door was made available for me. Very fortunately, I do not take that for granted. But in any event, when I was reading the Netflix culture deck, I got very excited because it seemed like a culture that I really wanted to be a part of. It was high performance, it was open, it was very transparent. And I will say this, for the good or bad, because there's good or bad at Netflix. I know people at Netflix, friends of mine, who have been there for the better part of a decade, which is actually in big tech. And actually, I should preface this with, technically, and this was my own thought, I have to stop thinking about Netflix as big tech, because even though I'm in tech, and I was like in a technical role there, it's actually an entertainment company. So it's less surprising to think about people being there for a decade or more when you think about it as an entertainment company rather than a tech company. Because at a tech company, it's fairly unusual especially like a Silicon Valley tech company, quote unquote. It's very unusual for somebody to be there for that long. But in any event, I was very excited to read that culture deck. And for better or worse, Netflix does live those cultural values. They talk about those cultural values. Transparency is built into their systems. The concept of freedom and responsibility, which they espouse in their culture deck. You know, you have the freedom to do whatever it takes to get your job done, but you bear the responsibility of the choices you make for that freedom. I love that concept of freedom and responsibility, despite the fact that internally some people called it big F little r, right? People have a lot of freedom, but they didn't bear a lot of the responsibility for it. And that's dependent on where you were in the company, of course. But in any event, I did take a lot away from leading a company at that size via culture. And to your point, I actually, and also I wanted to mention this about your conflict management conversation. I have a mission, vision, and values for my team. It's an exercise that I use for every team I either come onto or I form. We create our own mission, vision, and values for our team that is aligned. Hopefully the company has mission and values, but it is aligned upwards to the company's, but it is our own mission, vision, and values for how we operate the team. And I also have a culture memo for my team, which talks about healthy interpersonal behaviors, meeting expectations, what happens when there is conflict on a team, how do we resolve conflict in a healthy way. And it's, you know, it has like strategies to do that and little tips and little workshops and things of that nature. So I think those sorts of things from a company perspective are really important. If you're a team leader and you're listening to this or you're watching this and your company lacks some of those things or doesn't have a culture memo or a culture deck, you have the capability, and you probably should, good exercise to actually do that with your teams and create those environments for your teams, because they're very important for your teams to grow in a healthy way. And a lot of times those sorts of cultures sometimes can shelter your teams from some of the other toxicity that occurs outside of your team's own culture. So I find this to be very important, and I commend you and your co-founders and all of the employees at TAHO for actually living those cultural values. It's challenging to do, but you guys are doing it very well.
Evidenced by this call, evidenced by this video, Jeff, I've learned from the best.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. Please continue. No, it's very kind. Thank you so much. I want to ask you, I want to wrap soon because I want to respect your time. We're going on an hour, but I do have two final questions for you. So through your leadership journey, you've learned a lot. You've made a lot of mistakes, as you've mentioned. You've pivoted a lot. Can you think of something a leader should never do, and conversely, something a leader should always do?
You know, I don't know if there's recency bias in this, and I hate to sound repetitive here. A leader should always purposefully build the culture. The leader must build the culture that leans into the vision that they have for how the team's going to behave, output, and execute. Right. The thing that they should never do is allow for any ounce of the culture to develop without their at least oversight, approval, or say so. If you don't exercise leadership, if you don't exercise control over the development of that culture, that gap will be filled. That gap will be filled, and it will be filled by conflicting values, because everybody's an individual. And especially, like I'm going to say, it'll happen anywhere, but it's heightened in tech. It's heightened in tech because when you think of somebody that comes from Amazon, or somebody that comes from Apple, or someone that comes from Meta, or someone that comes from Google, right? Someone that comes from Netflix, there are behavioral norms from those different businesses, right? And there are behavioral idiosyncrasies that those norms carry with them. And those people come, and if you don't have strong cultural guidelines and guidance for them, guiding principles, values, things for them to pursue, they're just going to bring those cultural values and those idiosyncrasies along with them. And when you mix all of those different values, all of those different principles, and those idiosyncrasies that come out downstream or yield from those, it's collision. It's collision, and there's an extreme lack of alignment. And that lack of alignment falls in to behavioral expectations, what one individual expects of another individual.
Yeah.
And when there's misalignment there,
Yeah.
man, everything falls apart. So I'm owning the fact that we just had this big culture discussion, but I can't express enough how important it is for that, how important that is to me. The one thing I'll say that so that's the old, let's say that's you should always do. The leader should always do that. Intent, build culture with intent and control and guidance, right? The thing that I'll say that I think that there's something that a lot of leaders don't understand, and from my money, from Todd's perspective, distilling leadership down to its single most important ingredient is inspiration, right? A lot of people mix management and leadership, or commingle those two words often. They're not the same thing, right? Managers need to lead, right? Leaders need to manage, right? But they're not the same thing. Leadership in its essence, for me, is about inspiration. It's about inspiring those to get things done, right? And when it comes to management at its core, it's about balance. It's about achieving balance through a process, through an activity, through an event, through the course of someone's career path, right? It's about achieving balance, managing resources to output, managing capabilities to accountabilities, right? That's what management is. It's about balance at its thrust. Leadership is about inspiration. Management is about balance. And don't get those two things commingled or mixed up, because they're very, very different things that you must flex on both fronts. Can I add to that, or am I going to?
Of course. No.
So I'd also like to share that when people, as leaders, go through their positions, one thing that comes up quite frequently is fairness, right? And I think that people have a lot of challenge with the term fairness, because fairness means something to different people, right? I think that people have different dimensions of what's fair. And as a leader, it's really important to understand that fairness distilled down to its essence is consistency, right? And if you want to figure out how to be fair, if you want to figure out how to articulate what is fair and what's not, and how to validate somebody's perception of what's fair or not is valid, it's about, where do I see the consistency? That which is consistent is fair, right? Yeah. And that's something that I think a lot of people fall short on, because they lean into their own interpretations without actually having a real good definition.
I think that is such a great distillation. There is a large body of research on the topics of institutional and procedural justice. So how fair do people perceive the company? And then, as an abstract concept, and then how fair do people view the procedures and processes that are happening to them personally, right? And it really comes down, at the end of the day, it comes down to how consistently is that justice applied across different cohorts of people within the company. And so you're so right. And I think it speaks very importantly to the perception of a leader when that individual, that leader, is applying justice, to use that very strong term, but applying justice consistently across people. Are the same standards being applied across different strata of individual? And that not only is that an important cultural concept, but it's also extremely important for people to see. And it makes a big difference on employee engagement and people's perception of the fairness of the company that they are working for when they see that consistency applied in both institutional and procedural contexts. So I completely agree with you there. Todd, I want to thank you so much for your time. This was a really great interview. It was awesome listening to your story, and awesome hearing about the evolution of TAHO. Let me ask you in our closing moments, are there any upcoming projects you're working on? Is there anything you want to share? Do you want to talk about TAHO to the listening audience? Anything you'd like to share with us?
Hey, I want to encourage people to come check us out. Just go to taho.is, check it out. We have a return on investment calculator. We've got a great product that's really easy to deploy. It deploys in any cloud environment, any on-prem environment. We can help you out in edge environments. And I also want to note that from a project perspective, we're getting ready to launch the next version of our product. And I can't share too much about it, but it really, we're changing how big fleet computing is done. We're changing how big fleet computing, behaves. We're changing the orchestration model. We're changing the scheduling model, and it's something that no one else has seen before. Got a few trademarks in flight, got a few patents in flight, so we can't talk about it just yet. But there's more to come. So come check us out on the website and follow us. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. So appreciate it. Oh, and Jeff, I appreciate hearing your stories today, by the way.
Oh, thanks, Todd, very much. I will also say to any prospective engineer out there, look at TAHO's job page, because I don't say this about many places, but I will say this from my own experience. TAHO is the kind of place you want to work. So if you go and see if there are open jobs out there, highly recommend you apply, because TAHO is the kind of place where the leadership is excellent, the tech is excellent, the culture is excellent. A lot of my friends from the industry work at TAHO. I haven't spoken to some of them for a long time, but I see I know who works at TAHO, and a couple of my old colleagues from around the Bay Area are there with you. So great company. Highly recommend if you're out there seeking a new role, or if you're just seeking a role, give TAHO a shot, because the company is really amazing.
We're always hiring too. We're always hiring. So there's
amazing.
Plenty of stuff open on the careers page right now, which is great. So thanks.
Awesome. Todd, thank you so very much. This is the evening of New Year's Eve. So I hope you and the family have a very happy and safe and healthy New Year. And you and I will catch up in just a couple of weeks.
Wishing you, the family, and everybody watching a prosperous 2026.
Thank you, my friend. Have a wonderful night. I'll talk to you soon.
You too, partner.